Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Prabhupada Hare Krishna Mahamantra Ki Jai. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Thank you very much, Rajesh Govinda Prabhu Mukti Gatri Mataji and Mitra Vinda Mataji for joining our Friday satsang. So let's have Kirtan for about 20 minutes, then we'll start the class.
Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prashaya
Just music at your place, Prabhu.
Imate Bhakti Vedanta Samniti Namne Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunnavadi Paschata Deshotarine Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Sivasadi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare गौर प्रेमानंदे हरि हरि बोल।
राम श्री कृष्ण की जय, प्रभुपाद की जय, राजेश गोविंद प्रभु मुक्तिदात्री माता जी एंड फैमिली की जय।
Thank you, Prabhu. Thank you for giving the opportunity.
As usual. Thank you. So Hare Krishna. Thank you, Vatsala Mataji, for joining, and Ram Sham
Thank you,
Prabhu.
Prabhu.
So let's, before Ajit Krishna Prabhu joins, let's do a quick recap of last week's session. Ram Sham Prabhu, are you there?
Hare Krishna Prabhuji, Dandavat Pranam.
Yeah, Hare Krishna Prabhu, Dandavat Pranam, all goes to Srila Prabhupada. So, Prabhu, you have to lead. Last class I was absent and I couldn't get the time to revisit the video recording. So, can you please take us through the last week's session quickly?
I'm just looking, Prabhuji, where I have the note. So, meanwhile, if anybody remembers, so we can.
Mitravinda Mataji?
Yeah, Mitravinda Mataji was there.
Vatsala Mataji.
Okay, so we had there unattached to the three modes of material nature. So that was by controlling the senses and use the senses in Krishna service. So that we talked about like a kind of Anya Vilasita Sunyam, and also related to the NOI verse 1, Vacha Vegam Manasa Krodha Vegam Jiva Vegam. So how we can control our senses, and the same senses can be applied to the Krishna. So that while talking, I was using the verse which is in the Srimad Bhagavatam, that is third canto, 25th chapter, and verse number 20, that is the Prasangam Ajaram Pasam Atmanaha Kavayo Vidu Sayeva Sadhu Sukrita Moksha Dvara Apavritam. So means the attachment, material attachment, whatever we have, if we that attachment, if we apply to the pure devotee, so that opens the door of liberation. So that so main purpose is we have to unattach to the three modes of material nature, and when we unattach to the three modes of material nature, so Krishna said, we without activity we cannot live. So we have to do the activity. So we will attach somewhere. So only we have to attach, detach from this three modes of material nature, and that we have to attach to the Krishna service. So that's there in the verse number 23. Activity to the material world, or the three modes of material nature activity, when used in Krishna consciousness, then it is transcendental. So when it is used in the Krishna service, then it becomes transcendental. So we talked about the analogy as well. So indigestion caused by the milk, and the same milk product, that is the curd, that cures. So whatever, like indigestion caused by the milk. So meaning, like Krishna internal potency, external potency is the material world. So that same material world means external energy, if applied in Krishna service, that becomes transcendental. So that is as a curd. So that cures that. And then we talked about some kind of so that's that much I have the note, Prabhuji, that much I remember. So rest, I think Ajit Krishna Prabhu has already joined. Hare Krishna Prabhuji, Dandavat Pranam. All goes to Srila Prabhupada. Hare
Krishna Prabhu, Dandavat Pranam, all goes to Srila Prabhupada.
Krishna
What? Hare Krishna.
Just Prabhu. Hare Krishna.
Jai Hare Krishna. Dharam Pranam. What? All right. So I think that was it as far as the recap is concerned. I think that covered most everything that we had done the last time. So I think we'll move ahead with the rest of the verses today. So last time we basically went through verse 26, 24, 25, 26, and 27. So actually, the next few verses all the way through 33, they basically talk, they're on the same theme. So maybe we can do 28, 29, 30, well, all the way through 33.
Yeah, sure, bro. So we'll start from 27th or 28th. I don't know where we ended last time.
Yeah, 28.
28th, okay. Okay, so anybody wants to lead? If not, I'll start. Okay. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate. Bhagavad Gita ki jai. Chapter 4, text 28. Dravya yagna tapo yagna.
Dravya
Tavyagna tapoyagna
Yoga yagna tatapare.
Yoga
yagna tapare
Swadhyaya gnana yagnascha.
swadhyaya jnana yagnascha
Yataha samshita prataha.
yataha samsita vrtaha.
Translation by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Having accepted strict vows, some become enlightened by sacrificing their possessions, and others by performing severe austerities, by practicing the yoga of eightfold mysticism, or by studying the Vedas to advance in transcendental knowledge. Thank you. Yes. Ramsham Prabhu, you want to go?
Yeah, Prabhuji, I can do that. Apane juvati pranam
Apane pranam
prane panam tatha pare
prane
Pare.
pranapana gati rudva
Rudva.
pranayam parayanaha
pranayama
apare niyataharaha
aparenyataharaha
pranan prane sujuvati.
prana prane
Jupati.
And the translation by His Divine Grace of Acharna Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada, Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Still others who are inclined to the process of breath restraint to remain in trance, practice by offering the moment of the outgoing breath into the incoming and the incoming breath into the outgoing, and thus at last remain in trance, stopping all breathing. Others, curtailing the eating process, offer the outgoing breath into itself as a sacrifice. Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Prabhu. Text 30. Muttarvanda Mataji, you wanted to go? Okay. Prema Madhurya Mataji. Narsimha Prabhu.
Prabhu, which text? Can you just repeat the text, Prabhu?
It is chapter 4, text number 30.
Okay. Sarve api ete yagya vedo
Sarve
yagyavido
yagya shapita kalmasa
yagya shapita kalmasa
yagya shishtamrita bhujo
yagya srishtamrita
yanti brahma sanatanam.
yanti brahma sanatanam.
Translation, Mataji.
Yes, okay. All these performers who know the meaning of sacrifice become cleansed of sinful reactions. And having tasted the nectar of the results of sacrifices, they advance towards the supreme eternal atmosphere. Purport by, should I read the purport, Prabhu, or?
No, only translation is that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mataji.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Narsimha Prabhu.
Nayam lokosti ayagyasya
Nayam
Yagyasya
koto nyakuru sattama.
Kuto
anya kurusatama.
Translation by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada ki jai.
Yeah.
O best of the Kuru dynasty, without sacrifice one can never live happily on this planet or in this life. What then of the next? Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Prabhu. Vatsala Mataji.
Prabhu?
Yes, Mataji. You can see on the screen, right?
Yeah, I have a book too.
Yes, 32.
Evam bahu vidayajna
Evam
Evam
bahuvitayajna
vitata brahmano mukhe
vitata
Brahmano
mukhe
karmanyan viditan sarvan
Karmagyan
sarvan
evam nyatva vimokshase.
Evam
yatva
vimokshase.
vimokshase.
Translation by Srila Prabhupada Jai. All these different types of sacrifice are approved by the Vedas, and all of them are born of different types of work. Knowing them as such, you will become liberated. Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Mataji.
Thank you.
Ajit Krishna Prabhu, you want to go with 33 also?
Sure, I can go with 33. Shreyan Dravyamaya Yagna Jnana Yagnat Parantapa Sarvam Karma Kilam Partha
Sarvam
Karma Partha
Jnane Paris Amapyate.
Jnane
Parismapyate.
Translation by Divine Grace Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. Jai Prabhupada.
Yeah.
O chastiser of the enemy, the sacrifice performed in knowledge is better than the mere sacrifice of material possessions. Above all, after all, O son of Pratap, all sacrifices of work culminate in transcendental knowledge.
Thank you, Prabhu.
Okay. I think we can just start the invocation prayers and then we can continue our discussion.
Yes, sir.
Om Agyantimindasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurmetam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yutapadakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sagana Raghunathanvitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Saitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sagana Lalita Shri Vishakhanvitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Deen Bandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namastute Tapta Kanchana Gorangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Suti Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vanchakalpatrubhascha Kripa Sindhubhya eva cha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Vasari Gaur Bhaktavinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So text 28, I'll just start. Dravya Yagnastapo Yagna Yoga Yagnastapthapare Swadhyaya Jnana Yagnascha Yataya Samshita Vrataha. Translation: having accepted strict vows, some become enlightened by sacrificing their possessions, and others by performing severe austerities, by practicing the yoga of eightfold mysticism, or by studying the Vedas to advance in transcendental knowledge. So like we had discussed last time, verses from 25 to 33, they're basically talking about the many different types of sacrifices that are there, which are appropriate for people at different levels of consciousness, levels of spiritual consciousness. And just as a recap, I mean, we had discussed the Vedas are designed, the Vedas are so vast, there's so much variety in the Vedas. That is because there are 400,000 different types of human beings in terms of their different levels of spiritual consciousness. And so the Vedas have different prescriptions. But the goal is one. The goal of the Vedas is to help everybody, regardless of which category, which one of the 400,000 different types of species, different types of human beings they are. The goal is to help each one of them advance to the next step of spiritual consciousness and eventually come to the platform of bhakti. And therefore, the Vedas have all these different varieties of recommendations. In fact, it's interesting to note here that most faiths are fairly, I want to say, there's less variety in terms of the practices, the rituals, and the recommendations. And that's a plus and a minus. A plus because people who follow a particular faith, they all kind of do the same thing. And so there's very little difference between them. But in our Vedic tradition, it is by design that there are these many different prescriptions. And therefore, people kind of, and so the downside to that is that sometimes people get confused. They say, we are following the Vedic system. They're following the Vedic system, but each person is doing something different. So they start feeling that even though we are all following the Vedic system, each one of us does different things. So maybe we are following a different faith. So the plus side to that is that those who understand why the Vedas are set up in this manner have a more holistic view of things. And so they can help others understand that even though each person following the Vedic system may be doing something different, but that is by design, because everybody's spiritual consciousness is different. And the Vedas are trying to get each one of them to advance to the next step of spiritual consciousness so that eventually they can come to the platform of bhakti. And actually, I don't think there's any other faith out there that has this kind of variety. So the plus point to that is that the Vedic system caters to every possible type of human being out there. The downside to it is that it can cause conflict amongst the followers because each one thinks that I'm doing something different. So maybe we are not following the same path. So anyway, those of us, thanks to the mercy of Prabhupada and our acharyas, those of us who understand that, or we've been exposed to this understanding that the variety that exists in the recommendations in the Vedas is designed such that people in different levels of consciousness find something appropriate that they can follow and which will help them advance spiritually. So in text 28, there are 4 types of sacrifices that are mentioned. And these 4 types are, first they say, and some become enlightened by sacrificing their possessions. So that's number 1. Number 2, others by performing severe austerities. And the purport, there's more detail into that. Third is some practice 8-fold mysticism, yoga, 8-fold system. So that's the Ashtanga yoga system. And then the 4th kind of sacrifice that has been mentioned here is studying the Vedas. It's called Swadhyaya. Now, think about it from a practical perspective, how intelligent this approach is. The first type, it says, having accepted strict vows, some become enlightened by sacrificing their possessions. Prabhupada explains in the purport that there are many well-to-do families in India and actually across the world, everywhere. Philanthropy is a respected and prevalent practice all over the world. It's not just restricted to any one country, but philanthropy is recognized and celebrated all over the world. And so giving in charity is definitely a sacrifice because you're sacrificing your possessions. And that helps reduce one's attachment to material possessions. And by reducing attachment to material possessions, one tries to increase our attachment to a higher cause or service of the Supreme Lord. So knowingly or unknowingly, I mean, when people perform charity, they perform sacrifices, they engage in acts of philanthropy, knowingly or unknowingly, they are accumulating pious credits. And those pious credits will come to their rescue at the time of need, in the sense that at the end of this life, they will be given a chance to move even higher into a higher level of spiritual consciousness, such that they'll be able to start their next life from where they left off. And that principle applies regardless of what type of sacrifice one engages in. So here there are 4 mentioned. Second type is by severe austerities, extreme fasting and sitting in caves and meditating and that kind of thing. And that is kind of similar to the 8-fold or the Ashtanga yoga system too. And then lastly, there's one where Prabhupada says, studying the Vedas to advance in transcendental knowledge. And so those are typically the jnanis. They want to learn about the Lord. They want to acquire knowledge or jnana. So they spend a lot of time in studying the Vedas. So each of these processes is good. A person who is basically a person born in a Brahmin family, or a person born with Brahminical qualities, they generally have an aptitude for studying scriptures and acquiring knowledge and then disseminating that, patan. As these are some of the qualities described in the Bhagavad Gita for those who have a Brahminical frame of mind, studying Shastra and teaching Shastra. And so you could be doing something else with your time too. But those who sacrifice their time from material pursuits and use it instead in studying the scriptures, they are being referenced here. And so Prabhupada says, by studying the Vedas, they advance in transcendental knowledge. Now, in the purport, Prabhupada explains that all of these are called Swadhyaya Yagna, or engagement in the sacrifice of studies. Engagement in the sacrifice of studies. Now, sometimes what happens is that Gyanis, they try to study with the hope that they'll be able to experience or find evidence of the Lord's existence, or of any spiritual concept that they may have come across. So there is that tendency for empirical evidence in their mind, and they want to see things for themselves before they believe it. So sometimes the Gyanis tend to move in that direction, and there are others who study the Shastra, and because it's Shruti, it's the Vedas, it's the Vani of the Supreme Lord, they accept it. They accept it. And the Nectar of Instruction explains that one who accepts knowledge on the basis of disciplic succession, or if it's descending, coming from a higher authority, that person is more intelligent than the person who will only accept it when they are shown some evidence of it, because it takes greater intelligence to understand without even seeing evidence of something. So those are some of the, now these four different type of sacrifices have been described to help us understand that there are people with different tendencies. So like we said, the Brahminical people will generally tend to engage in study of the Vedas. Those who are, let's say, more in the Vaishya mindset, performing businesses and so forth, typically those are the people that have, vast amounts of money. And we've seen from experience, I mean, those who have extra money, they tend to engage in acts of philanthropy and charity and so forth, opening large hospitals and helping the poor and so on and so forth. In fact, a lot of times people ask us that instead of performing Sankirtan and so forth, why don't you all just go and feed the homeless or help those in need? And not that we don't, of course we do. But we also understand, by the mercy of Srila Prabhupada and the Acharyas, that a higher form of sacrifice than simply feeding the poor or the homeless is to give them the knowledge by which they can be happy forever. Because you can give a person food that might feed them for one meal or 1 day or 5 days or 6 days, and at the end of that, again, they're back to square one. You can't solve the problem of life permanently, but Prabhupada came to this planet to help us understand the permanent solution for ending the fourfold miseries of this material existence: birth, death, old age, and disease. And that's why he focused so much on sharing transcendental knowledge. So sharing transcendental knowledge is the highest form of charity. And so that's why when sometimes people question us why we focus so much on it instead of just feeding the poor and so forth, this is the answer to it. We do help the poor and the needy, but we go beyond that and give people the permanent solution to the problem of birth, death, old age, and disease. In other words, material existence. So then in text 29, there are some more, there are further type of sacrifice is described. And this is basically the pranayam, the yogis who follow the pranayam system. And essentially, Prabhupada explains that pranayam involves controlling the air that one breathes. And the whole purpose of controlling your breathing is to help control the mind. By controlling breathing, one can help control the mind. And then Prabhupada emphasizes in each of these purports that instead of following any of these other practices, the best, most effective and efficient way of controlling the mind in Kali Yuga is to simply follow the path of Krishna consciousness, to engage your senses in devotional service to the Lord. That is efficient, that is practical, that is doable, and that is much more potent than any of these other practices. So in text 29, I mean, the system of yoga, like Prabhupada says, there's Hatha Yoga, Pranayam, all kinds of breathing exercises. And a lot of times we come across people that say, well, I follow practices of pranayam, and I find I feel very, very rejuvenated, and my health is better, and so forth. And that's true. I mean, these exercises will definitely help us experience better health and more energy and so forth. But that's not the end all. That's not the only purpose for which these are recommended. The whole idea is to be able to control the mind and engage it in Krishna's service. As a side effect, you might feel better, you might feel more energized, and that's consistent with any practice that allows us to make spiritual progress. I mean, you will feel good because you're feeding the soul, and to the extent that the body feels good too, there's no contradiction there. But making the body feel good is not the goal. Unlike most yoga centers today, I mean, they focus on making the body feel good, become healthy, and so on and so forth. But the whole idea of yoga means to connect with the Supreme Lord. The whole idea of yoga is to revive our spiritual consciousness. And so Prabhupada explained or emphasizes that point multiple times in these verses. So that's 29. And then it's interesting that in 30, Prabhupada says, all these performers who know the meaning of sacrifice become cleansed of sinful reactions. And then having tasted the nectar of the results of sacrifice, they advance toward the supreme eternal atmosphere. Now, the interesting part here is that all these performers who know the meaning of sacrifice become cleansed of sinful reactions. Those who know the meaning of sacrifice. That means those who are not just following the ritual for the sake of following the ritual, but who understand the purpose behind the ritual, the purpose behind the sacrifice. Those people become cleansed of sinful reactions, and they taste the nectar of the results of sacrifice, and they make advancement. And most devotees will agree that when we started the practices of chanting and eating prasad and so forth, we felt the difference. We could feel something good, which kept us coming back, which kept bringing us back to these practices, which fuels our daily sadhana, our daily commitment to, a couple of hours of chanting and so many other things that we do as part of our devotional practices. How is that being fueled? It's being fueled by this feeling as Prabhupada said, having tasted the nectar of the results of sacrifices. So you do feel some nectar, or we do taste some nectar in these practices, and that's what keeps bringing us. That's what brings us back. And so then, in text 30, that he goes on to say that without sacrifice, one can never live happily on this planet or in this life. And what about the next? So now we're getting into the idea of the next life. And Vedic sacrifices, like earlier we saw that in Bhagavad Gita it is mentioned that Krishna says that I sent forth generations of men along with sacrifices. Performance of sacrifices leads to rains and grains, and they'll keep people happy. So it's a whole system of life, system of living that has been given to us in the Vedas. And typically it's the Varnashram system. You follow that in accordance with the practices of the Vedas, it leads to spiritual advancement. And it leads to material prosperity, which in turn frees people up to have time and energy and resources to engage in spiritual practices. Then when they engage in these spiritual practices, they make spiritual advancement. And eventually, the idea of liberation, the idea of going back to Godhead becomes clearer in their minds. And they start attempting to engage more and more in these practices, and with the ultimate goal of going back to Godhead. That is the idea. So over here in 31, Krishna says that without sacrifice, you cannot live happily in this planet. So what about the next life? In this life, you won't be happy. So clearly, I mean, if you're not performing sacrifice in this life, you're accumulating more and more sinful reactions. That'll lead you to a worse condition of life in the next life. So if you want to be happy in the next life, follow the system of sacrifices in this life. So again, I mean, the point that the Vedas make is that we have a tendency to perform sinful acts. Each sinful act has a reaction. The law of karma is such that our next life is determined by the karma in this life. And the Vedas instructions are designed such that if we follow them sincerely, we'll understand this fact and thereby start reducing activities that lead to sinful reactions. And so finally, in text 32, Krishna says all these different type sacrifices are approved by the Vedas, and all of them are born of different types of work. Again, I mean, this brings us back to the point that I was making earlier, that there are different types of sacrifices, and they are different because they are born of different types of work, meaning they are designed for people under different combinations of the modes of material nature. So we discussed this earlier. There are three primary colors: red, green, and blue. You're on mute, Prabhu.
Yeah, Prabhuji, RGB.
RGB.
RGB, right. I was trying to remember that. Red, green, and blue. And so you mix those in different combinations, you get a whole bunch of different colors. And so here you have these three modes of material nature, RGB, and so they've been mixed in so many different in different proportions with each other that they lead to 400,000 different types of human psychology, mentality, spiritual consciousness, whatever you want to call it. And so therefore the Vedas have different types of sacrifices that are approved by the Vedas, and all of them are born of different types of work, or in other words, different type of combinations of R, G, and B in us. And knowing them as such, you will become liberated. So Krishna is saying, once you understand this fact, you can try to control the influence of the modes of nature, such that you rise from ignorance to passion, passion to sattva gun, and then finally rise even above sattva gun into Shuddha sattva. And then finally in 33, Krishna says, the sacrifice performed in knowledge is better than mere sacrifice of material possessions. And this is what we were saying some time back, that, just mere sacrificing of material possessions, people keep challenging ISKCON devotees. Why do you not feed people more? Why don't you give more in charity? Why don't you open hospitals? Or what's wrong with that? And so Krishna says the sacrifice performed in knowledge is better than sacrificing material possessions. So our focus is on trying to give people knowledge about who we are. We're the soul, we're not the body. And therefore, he says, after all, son of Pratap, all sacrifices of work culminate in transcendental knowledge. All sacrifices of work culminate in transcendental knowledge. The goal is to acquire transcendental knowledge. And that goal is accomplished by all these different sacrifices. But the grade of sacrifice is different. And so that's why we are so fortunate that Krishna appeared as Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, gave us the one sacrifice that we need to perform amongst the whole host of different sacrifices recommended in the Vedas. He says, okay, let's cut to the chase. Just focus on Sankirtan Yagya. Hearing, chanting, eating Krishna Prasad. That's most efficient. That'll take you to the goal very quickly. So anyway, so let me, I've been speaking for a long time. Let's just open it up for comments, questions, realizations, and then we'll go from there.
So very nicely explained, Prabhu. Thank you very much. I have a comment and a question. So here, the entire verses he is explaining about the sacrifice, right?
Yeah.
So what are the results of sacrifice and how to advance sacrifice? So it's a gradual process, if I understand correctly, saying, because the sacrifice is meant for all the ashramas, varnashrama, right? All the 4 basic ashramas, and each category has their own way of sacrificing things.
Right.
So if you are a Shudra, so would that sacrifice elevate you to a Kshatriya level, the higher level, or be just because of sacrificing things? Because at that Shudra level, I won't have anything to sacrifice, right? I don't have knowledge, I don't have material possessions, I don't have, probably bhakti I may not have, I don't know. But
right.
that at the Shudra level, we may not be able to think that much. So all that we have sacrifice, what we have nothing to sacrifice. Whatever little material things we have, we could sacrifice. So would that really elevate that person in the same life, next life, whenever, to a higher state of life, like Kshatriya, Vaishya, Brahmana? So what is the understanding there?
Okay, yeah, I can respond to that. First, I just see Mitranda Mataji has a hand up, and if she wanted to say something.
Oh, I'm sorry, Mataji, I didn't see that. So please go ahead.
No, hi Krishna. No, Prabhu, please, you're first. I don't mind waiting.
Okay, madam. So Muktasanga Prabhu, when you say that the Shudra performs a sacrifice, did you have a particular sacrifice in mind, or were you just referring in general to the idea of a Shudra performing sacrifices according to this?
The general idea. I'm not sure what Shudra can perform a sacrifice, first of all.
Right.
And if at all he does, would that elevate him to a higher position?
Yes. So according to the Varnashram system, the sacrifice recommended for a Shudra, if he performs that, it will elevate him from his particular status in terms of spiritual consciousness. May not elevate him necessarily from a Shudra to a Vaishya and then to a Kshatriya and then to a Brahman. Because the idea of the sacrifice of performing these Vedic sacrifices is not simply to elevate your Varna. It is to elevate your spiritual consciousness. And so if the Shudra performs the activity correctly, the Shudra can immediately be elevated to the highest level of spiritual consciousness. That is the beauty of the recommendation. And that is why Mahaprabhu came and gave us the Sankirtan Yagya, saying, first of all, we know that in Kali Yuga, we are all Shudras. Our mentality is basically Shudra. Kalo, Shudra Sambhava. Majority of us have this Shudra mentality. And yet, by performing this one Yagya, we can immediately elevate ourselves. Not immediately, but meaning depending on the sincerity of our practice. But we can follow this one simple recommended sacrifice of Sankirtan and elevate ourselves from our current Shudra status to at least Sattva-gun status, if not beyond that even. So, I mean, I think we are very fortunate in Kali Yuga, and especially in this particular phase of Kali Yuga, where Chaitanya Mahaprabhu has appeared, and this is the golden age, 10,000 years, this will last. And within these 10,000 years, if we take advantage of this process from Shudra, we go right up to Shuddha Sattva. I hope that answers your question. And if Mitranda Mataji has something more to add, be happy to hear that.
Yeah, thank you, Prabhu. I have another question, but I'll ask if time permits at the end.
Okay.
Okay, so Mitranda Mataji, please go ahead.
Hare Krishna, thank you so much, Muktasanda Prabhu. Thank you so much for being here again, Prabhu. I thoroughly enjoy your classes. And because it's Krishna consciousness, I don't feel bad about enjoying that way. But ultimately, enjoyment is not a bad thing. It's just who, what, when, where, and how we are enjoying. That's the issue for us as Bhakti Yoga practitioners, right?
You're breaking up, Mataji. I don't know if it's just me or...
Did you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yeah, Ajit Krishna.
Can you hear me now? Hey, Bill?
Yeah, we can hear you, Mataji. I can hear you. Ajit Krishna Prabhu, it must be your network.
And now I can hear you, Mataji.
Oh,
Do you mind,
yes.
repeating, Mataji? Please, sorry about that.
So in a Srimad Bhagavatam class, there was a discussion about enjoyment and how we are to enjoy for Krishna only. And so I have two parts to this. And so in connecting with others, it kind of sounds like not enjoyment. I'm just going to be frank with you. It sounds like we're not enjoying. And so the goal of spiritual life is to not enjoy. And I hear this, because I do some work with interfaith and different things. It's in pretty much every spiritual tradition to talk about enjoyment in a way that makes it sin or bad. But my reflection, I forget what the verse was today, on that because I try to keep everything centered around keeping my children healthy and staying inspired and motivated, because that's an aspect of practicing bhakti too. And then speaking to others in a way that's not a lie, but helps them understand things in a way that will make bhakti yoga an option, a possibility, something that they might want to try out, something that, so when there's discussions about enjoyment, my realization today was, it's not that you don't enjoy, but sometimes it sounds like that when we're speaking, I guess to other devotees in ourselves, amongst ourselves. But when it comes to outward preaching and connecting, it's not that we don't enjoy. Actually, being raised Christian and having other studies of different practices, I can honestly say for myself that I believe practicing Bhakti Yoga, it's a higher level of enjoyment, and it's not like any other. It's just that we have to understand who, what, when, where, why, and how we are enjoying, and understanding the who is for Krishna. But especially the pure devotees, they do everything for Krishna. So there's a full sweep of just like, it's like no enjoyment for yourself, but actually their enjoyment is Krishna's pleasure. So it is enjoyment. But I have to say, like, for, as a mother, when I offer to Krishna, I am thinking of my children too. I have to, because if I don't, and I give them something that, if they're little children, you want them to eat, and it's Krishna Prasad. So there's always a benefit to that. So I was just reflecting on that, like, enjoyment piece, and the sin, this word sin is when we're enjoying for ourselves without thinking of Krishna. But again, trying to focus on helping people understand that enjoyment. Just try it. Think of Krishna, and you'll see that whatever you're offering that you would have just eaten yourself, you know, and I'm not saying I'm perfect, okay? But whatever you would have eaten yourself, once you offered to Krishna and his remnants, then when you offer it, that grape is like unbelievably flavorful. It's like the sweetest, the juiciest, everything. It changes, and Krishna changes that. But my question to you is regarding education.
Mhm.
So the aspect of education on Krishna helps us learn to love him. But in the material world, you know, education, it leaves. You know, people get Alzheimer's, dementia. You know, the aspect of acquiring education or knowledge in Krishna consciousness. Please discuss what the ultimate goal is, because there are ways and times that because of our conditioning, we want to learn as much as possible and see how much we can store and get these shlokas in our brains and repeat them and everything, right? For
Right.
Krishna's service. But because we have these, again, like you said, these modes, it gets mixed up. It gets in a pot. It gets mixed up together. So would you discuss how we can focus more on gaining this knowledge for the service of Krishna and focusing on Krishna, but in doing so, we have better interactions with each other as devotees and serving everyone, and how we can overcome these modes that get mixed up in us acquiring this knowledge and education, please?
Sure, Mataji. That's a great question, and it's got several parts to it, if I understood this right. So I'll try to address each of those parts as best I can. First of all, thank you very much for sharing your realization about enjoyment, because I just wanted to kind of say that I think you hit the nail on the head when you said that enjoyment for our own enjoyment without Krishna, meaning enjoyment in trying to just satisfy our senses, that is equal to sin, because it has a material reaction and it'll keep us bound in this material world. But enjoying with Krishna is really real enjoyment, because I mean, I think where a lot of us fail, and I'm kind of guilty of that too, is in not being able to convey correctly that enjoyment in and of itself is not wrong. In fact, according to our scriptures, it's all about enjoyment. I mean, Krishna's form is Satchidananda Vigraha. I mean, his form is full of bliss. He's always blissful. And he wants us to be blissful too. And the only way we can be always blissful, eternally blissful, is if we enjoy with him as his servants. He wants us to do that. It's when we try to enjoy by ourselves, that's when we land ourselves into trouble. So thank you very much for bringing that point up and for clarifying it. I mean, enjoyment is our goal. I mean, Krishna wants us to be happy. We want to be happy, and we can be happy with him. And then coming back to your question about how education can be focused. First of all, let me make certain that I understood your question right, Mother. Your question was, can education be focused on understanding our relationship with Krishna? Is that what you were asking about?
That's part of it, Prabhu, but it's how can we understand the effects of the modes of material nature from an authentic place, an introspective and authentic place, understand the modes of material nature in our desire to acquire knowledge for Krishna, in how we use that knowledge in Krishna's service, and ultimately how that knowledge affects us in our day-to-day lives.
So the way the knowledge affects us in our day-to-day life is obviously it makes us do things in accordance with Krishna's wishes, and that makes us happy. but how to understand which modes are acting upon us and how to understand how to counter those modes such that our process of acquiring knowledge is consistent with how Krishna wants it to be, is through the process of introspection. I think there is a lot that comes out of introspection if we analyze our own actions and our own motivations. And sometimes we may not be able to do a very good job of it. And that's why it's very important to just maybe bounce your motivations off of someone who you trust and someone who is in a position to give you unbiased feedback. Because if I were to just limit myself to introspection and not kind of share my thoughts with someone that I trust, I think I'll kind of end up convincing myself that everything that I'm doing is always correct, which is not true. I mean, there's always room for improvement. So I think that's where Guru, Sadhu, and Shastra, the three resources, come in. Of course, approach the spiritual master. They can, I mean, we all have experience of this. Our spiritual masters understand our natures very well, and they can give us to the point, unbiased feedback. That's Guru. Then Sadhu, I mean, associate with devotees, ask someone who you trust and respect to give you feedback, and they'll be able to help you identify the influence of the modes upon you such that you can counteract what you need to counteract and encourage more of what you're doing correctly. I was just seeing your text, sorry, Mataji, that kind of disappeared before I could read the entire piece of it. But anyway, or before I could read the entire thing. So I just got a piece of it. But Guru, Sadhu, and Shastra. Shastra, then the Shastra part kind of, we can read in association of devotees, but at the end of the day, the lessons that we get from Shastra can help us introspect and identify our own motivations, and we've got to be brutally honest with ourselves in terms of what are we doing wrong. I mean, we can always, it's easy to see what we're doing right, but I think it's a little challenging to see what we're doing wrong. So I think, again, Guru, Sadhu, and Shastra play a very important role in understanding and identifying the true impact of these modes upon us. I hope that answers your question somewhat, Madani.
You went right to the source of where the information is. It's just, I guess for me, having the spiritual intelligence and, strength and foresight to apply that. My Guru Maharaj is no longer on the planet physically. I feel very blessed to still have a connection and interaction with him in so many different ways. Srila Prabhupada also is Vapu and Vani. And when one leaves, then we have the other, and we have the association of devotees. And I'm very thankful to have your association as well. I'm wondering, do you give classes other places?
Not at the moment, Madhuri. I've been doing a lot of, I have done classes in the temple here in Atlanta locally, but outside of that, I mean, this is a forum that I've been spending my Fridays on, but be happy to answer questions that you have. I mean, if I can be of service in that manner, I'd be very happy to do what I can.
Mukta Sangha Prabhu is brilliant for making this possible to aspiring Vaishnavas like myself. And I feel very sad because there were some devotees that I ran into, and I needed to speak to them. I hadn't seen them in 9 years, but I need to plan for when you're on again. So I've spoken to Mukta Sangha Prabhu so that I can invite. The way that you speak is so effortless and free and kind that I believe that I want to invite people who are relatively very new actually to Krishna consciousness to just listen. And if they have a question, I have no doubt that the way you answer is so kind, and just they'll be free with speaking and asking questions to help them overall. Yeah. Thank you so much, Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna Mataji. First of all, thank you so much for those words of encouragement. I mean, obviously, I am very, very grateful to Mukta Sangha Prabhu too. I mean, because this is a great forum where it's like-minded devotees coming together, and we kind of, I mean, every time I walk away learning a lot from what I hear, all of the devotees kind of speak. So that's why it's really, really important to have everybody participate. And to the extent that you would like to bring people who might benefit from this, I think Mukta Sangha Prabhu, myself, all of us would be very, very happy to be able to serve in that manner. And we'll 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 try to keep the content and the messaging targeted such that it actually benefits the listeners. I mean, obviously, a lot of us here are initiated devotees, and some are not, some are aspiring. So people are at different levels. But to the extent that you have, if you think you have somebody who's very, let's say, has not been exposed to too much of this philosophy, then we can kind of tone it down such that it's appropriate for them and they get something out of it.
Thank you, Prabhu. Thank you very much. Saujanya Mataji, you have a question?
Yeah, just a small realization. Hare Krishna Prabhuji, Dandot Pranam.
Krishna Mataji.
Sorry, I joined a bit late. I had another urgent call to take. So the last part when you were saying about the highest charity is knowledge, because in the context of, why not build hospitals and that part. So I remembered something. I want to confirm if my understanding is correct. So one of the devotee, even I don't remember where, in a gathering or in a lecture, they did ask, like, why not even in the ISKCON temple, we bring like blood donation and then other kind of social services. So yes, and now that rings bell when you were saying that the highest charity is the knowledge. So my understanding, what I understood from this, which I want to make sure did I understand right, is that truly when a person gets that knowledge, then a lot of things are connected. You won't let's say you'll eat only prasadam, and then you won't get into these other whatever non-eating prasadam, and then get into diseases, and then get into, sometimes diseases are out of control, but that's just one example. And then your the attachment, greed, all that will slowly reduce because of the knowledge, and that's how indirectly you're helping the like a society, or how uh, indirectly it's helping. Because if somebody asks me a question, okay, just by telling knowledge, do you think it'll help with they're in need of money, or they're in need of health, or they're in need of some kind of situation for their living? But then if you see the root cause of that is, if you no, it's not always that it is like that, but to some extent it will help us when we are with the right knowledge, that those kind of things also will come down. I don't know if I explained it correctly, Rohit.
Yeah, no, you explained it very clearly, Mataji. So basically what I think was the point that that Krishna is making here is that there are different levels of charity. The highest, of course, is exposing people to knowledge of the Supreme Absolute. And why is that the highest level of charity? Because it's like uniting a lost child with their parents. So think about this analogy. Let's say there's a child who's homeless, who's kind of, the parents are looking for the child is looking for the parents, and the child is wandering on the streets. Somebody comes and gives that child a meal. The child will be very, very thankful. Say, great, I mean, I can't find my mom and dad, and you fed me my lunch, for example. But then the person goes away, and the child is like, when it comes to dinner time, the child is again kind of wondering, where are my parents? So while the act of giving the child lunch was great, it's an act of charity, it's very nice. But wouldn't it be nicer if if the person who gave the child lunch also helped the child find their lost parents, or the lost parents find the lost child, because then the child would be back home and safe and would not be wandering on the streets. That's our position. We are Krishna's lost children. All of us are his lost children. So if somebody feeds someone, that's nice. That's great. There's nothing wrong with that. But that's not enough. And so what the Shastra is telling us, in addition to giving a person a meal, please unite them with their parents too. Let them go home and sleep peacefully at night and live happily ever after, like they say, right? So Krishna wants us to live happily ever after. And so there are these different levels of charity. Uniting lost children with the parents, or uniting us with Krishna, is the highest level of charity. And just for the facts, during COVID, I know for a fact, at least like in New Delhi, for example, I have stats from our ISKCON temples there. There were millions of meals, free meals, that were distributed to people who were sick at home with COVID, who couldn't step out, and who didn't have enough food. Our ISKCON temples were organizing mass cooking and distribution drives and so on and so forth. So we do that. ISKCON does all of that, but we do more than that. We don't just stop there. I hope that
Yes,
helps.
Prabhu. Yes, perfect. Thank you. Thank you so much, Prabhuji. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Anybody else has any question?
Somebody texted in the chat window. Okay. Yeah. So
Okay.
nothing, bro, actually. I think no more questions. So thank you again, Prabhu. It's a wonderful session. And before I let everyone leave, I have small announcements that this Saturday is Baltimore Rath Yatra, if anybody is interested. I think some devotees are going from temple, ISKCON Philly temple. You can contact them. I'm not sure who are they, but and Sunday is Pauganda Pravacham, so kids program. So please attend at 10 a.m. Eastern time, same Zoom credentials. And this week, the class will be given by our good Mukunda Prabhu.
Oh, very nice.
Mukunda Prabhu, he will be giving the class, and he'll be talking about the pastimes of Lord Balram. So please attend and encourage him. And he's well prepared as always. Please join at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. And the June 2nd is our home program, which is next coming Thursday. So His Grace Dwarkadish Prabhu and Mataji will be gracing this occasion. It is a home program. So please come, and virtually you can bless us, Prabhu, Ajit Krishna Prabhu, for hosting this program. And
I need your blessings, Prabhu.
They are wonderful devotees. They come every year, but because of pandemic, they haven't been coming past 2 years. But they will start again from this year onwards. So June 2nd, Thursday at 6:30 p.m. So there'll be a short kirtan, and then a discourse, and then prasadam. So those who have got e-vite and who have not responded, if you can please respond, that it will be easy for us to plan for everything. Yes, thank you all. Thank you, Ajit Krishna Prabhu, again for a wonderful session.
Thank you all very much. Prabhuji's, Mataji's, Vanchaka
Thank you very much, Prabhu. Very nice.
Ajit Krishna Prabhu ki
Jai. Thank you, Prabhu. Thank you very
Thank you,
much.
Mataji. Hare Krishna.
Thank you.